got their living expenses, they can do that.
Right, so that's what we're looking at. Right, so he's paying, when it says salaries, it says, it doesn't say is he paying himself salaries or is he paying other people salaries? And so that's one of the questions. Are these salaries for him, $120,000, or are these salaries to other people and then he's not paying himself? That's his living expenses. What are those types of living expenses? That's one of the questions we got to find out.
Are they saying these are all deductible?
No, they're saying he deducted them. Did he do them right? So we're going to, chapter 6 is going to look at all these different types of expenses.
Wouldn't some of these deductions, though, because it's from his business, not be on the same form as some of the others?
They could be. That's what we're going to talk about. These are all different types of deductions. Some are good, some are not allowed, some are itemized deductions, and some are deductions for a business.
What kind of business is this?
This is a dental business.
No, I mean like sole proprietorship.
Well, they haven't told us. That's exactly what Jimmy just said. We don't know.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know. All he says is Dr. Payne determined the deductible associated with his dental practice.
I think that's
We got to assume right now it's a sole proprietorship. That would be my assumption.
Yeah, so some of the stuff would be on the K1.
A sole proprietorship doesn't do a K1. That's a corporation.
Okay.
All right. Well, not specific. Yeah, it would come down. So we're going to take a look at it and see what's going to happen. So first, when we're looking at it, deductions are allowed basically, I love this, legislative grace. All right. And they're defined narrowly. Okay. Whereas notice when we talked about income the last couple chapters, they're defined very grossly, right? Everything is included in income. Deductions are very narrowly defined. So include everything for income. We'll give you a few deductions that you can put along the way. All right, so substantiation requirements. So Leslie, this kind of goes to your question, what do they need to provide you? Well, it's not you as the tax preparer. What do they need to provide the IRS? Okay, so in fact, they should be providing you. So that's kind of the feel you want to get as a preparer is, okay, you don't have to give it to me, but you need to have it. And Katie can attest to this through VITA. There's people we know have it and could get it and just don't currently have it with them. And there's people that have no idea where their information is, but are just giving us a line. And in VITA, we're like, hey, you know what? Whatever you want us to put. Because if you tell us you have it, you need to understand that you are solely responsible for this information. I have to tell you that this is really beyond what would normally fit in this. To buy 3 cars the last 3 years is just a little bit excessive for paying sales tax. And I had to tell a lady that, and she was adamant, beyond, and pushy with me in VITA. That wasn't last year, but she was here last year. And she was like, I have it in my car if I have to drive out and get my, I said, fine. It didn't make any difference in the end with her tax return, but you could tell what she was trying to do. She was just trying to get more itemized deductions. Sales tax is higher. And I was like, fine. I mean, I couldn't prove she didn't buy 3 new cars in the last 3 years. It just wasn't typical. And the fact that she didn't have her sales tax receipt, she didn't have it the year before, was just interesting, you know. So adequate records. And that's basically what you want to describe to someone if you are doing their taxes, whether you're doing them as a CPA, whether you're doing them as an enrolled agent, or you're just doing them as a courtesy to somebody. You just want to say you need to keep records. I mean, I keep everything I possibly can. And I don't even feel like I keep everything I should keep. So deductions for AGI or AGI can be claimed even if we don't itemize. And going forward with the new tax law changes, that is going to be really important because more and more people aren't going to itemize. More and more people are going to want to put for AGI itemized deductions. I mean, for more and more for AGI deductions, which means they're going to try to push deductions into businesses, which means we're going to have to watch. Are they really business deductions or are they really personal deductions? Because you can't deduct personal things. You could itemize them before. So we need to make sure they're not going into businesses. And then itemized deductions, there's different percentages that we'll talk about, but that's in Chapter 10. It's its own little chapter. Deductions from AGI. Yeah, did you have a question?
Well, I had a question about mileage. Was it mileage?
Mileage will be an itemized deduction.
So that's staying there. So a lot of people.
No, it's gonna go. That's under the 2% AGI as a miscellaneous, and it's gonna go. So that's going to affect some people, but it's a 2% one, so it just depends. But that will stay under business. Mhm. So deductions from have to exceed total standard deduction, which is why you're going to see it go away. With these increased standard deductions, people are going to have a higher itemized, and we call that below the line.
Now, you can try to plan it, so let's say one year you know you're gonna have more deductions than you might make, and then you can just switch back and forth.
Yes, so if you know that if your itemized deductions, like for example, last year I paid my mortgage in December. All right, I did that trying to, because I knew that this might be the last, we might be able to try to itemize. So I paid January's mortgage in December, trying to get that in there. So you can do different things like that. So then next year, we'll only have 11 months of mortgage unless I do the same thing again, right, and pay it and go forward. So I'll just see how, I won't really know how that's going to portray until I go ahead, unless I just go ahead and pay another one. So when I get to December, I might pay January's mortgage again in December, and then I would actually have possibly 14 months of mortgage. So it just depends. I might actually be doing my own taxes in December to try to see if I need to pay that mortgage again, just to see if it'll help me.
Personal property, so that one that it's the date you pay, not the date that.
Personal property is always the date you pay. So a lot of people don't get that because what they do is they pay it late in January, and then it's due in that year. So taxes are always when it's paid, though. It doesn't matter. All things that go on your taxes have to be the date it's paid. It's not one of those. It's always. Your taxes are the day it's paid. All right, so what does it mean for deductions versus an itemized deduction versus a forward deduction? Well, it's a big change on your taxes. So, for example, if you take for AGI, you went from a gross income AGI of $30,000 to an AGI of $45,000. All right, so a deduction, if you were able to put it in your business income, takes you down to $30,000 and $45,000. You then have what was, okay, a standard deduction of $12,000, takes you down to a taxable income of $18,000. Over here, you didn't have that deduction, you had it itemized. Well, your itemized replaces your AGI, your standard deduction, so all you have is one, which means your taxable income is $30,000. So if you're able to use a for deduction instead of a itemized deduction, you get the deduction and your standard deduction. So you get both. So that's a big help.
And that's only if you have the business.
That's only the business side, and a handful that are below the income, and I'm going to show you what those are. They're things like student loan interest, what used to be moving expenses, half of your self-employment tax. There's a handful of ones that were there. Were is a key word.
Traveling, business if you're in show business.
Yeah, I don't even talk about that because people don't have it, but yeah, show business and different things like that. But this, being in your 4 AGI, obviously is a huge, that's a $12,000 swing.
And what's the, why 112 and 115? What am I missing there?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have an exam for Aaron to see?
I do. Okay, so we'll pick them back up. So basically the concept here, hopefully you guys figured that out, is you want 4. All right, it's always better than a from deduction. Here's a partial list of items that are for deduction besides trade or business. You were asking about that. Reimbursement for employee business expenses, deductions from sale or exchange of some property, business property, deductions for rental and royalty property, which we're going to jump to in a minute, alimony, okay, which we talked about is still lumped in if that's something you already have an agreement on, 1/2 of self-employment taxes paid, and then student loan interest. Quickly.
I want you to say it one more time. The alimony starts 2019.
It does, but if your agreement is already in place,
Yeah, you get to
that
keep
you
it.
get to keep it. Any new agreements going into effect after January do not get to deduct alimony or have to include alimony paid going forward after January 1st.
2019 tax.
January 1st, 2019.
Okay. So let me say it one more time.
Yeah. Health insurance premium paid for self-employed people. If you pay your own, you get to deduct those. Contributions to any type of profit sharing or pension if you do not have them at work. If you have a pension plan that doesn't include you. Premature penalties from time savings amounts and deposits. This is not to deduct the penalty for payment for early withdrawal from your 401k. All right, some people think that's not it. Moving expenses, however, those are suspended going forward, and the $250 teacher, yes.
Does that apply to like CDs?
That applies for CDs and deposits, but not for 401k.
Okay.
You actually, the payment for the penalty for that, you do have to pay, so. And then the moving is a big thing, all right, so that is suspended. And we talked about that last week. Deductions from AGI, this is its own chapter, all right, but just a couple of things that we will talk about later. These will be itemized deductions, yes.
I know we talked about it last week, but look, companies that are moving their employees to a whole different state and all that, so
Right.
they give you, I had a friend with $25,000 moving expense. So that's tax, she has to pay taxes on that.
She does, yes,
Yeah.
and the company doesn't get a deduction for giving it to her.
Oh, okay.
But
But then-
a good company will figure out how to include that in her pay, but also what they call gross up the employee's pay, so that they don't just include 25,000, they include 35,000.
Oh, okay.
So that they give them enough money that they're paying for the taxes, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yes. So there's ways that it can still be handled if they work for the right company. But yes, that is correct. All right, trade or business deductions. So this is at the very beginning of the chapter, and it just talks about Section 162A permits deductions for all ordinary and necessary expenses paid carrying on a business. That's things like wages and expenses used and 1/2 of employment. Those are all deducted for. All right, so it's just your normal type of business expenses. The biggest thing here is they have to be ordinary, meaning any other business would have that type of expense. They have to be necessary, meaning you can't have your business without. Now that's something I talk about even in financial accounting. When we're talking about what is an expense is something you have to do in order to generate the revenue in your business. Same thing here. And reasonable. All right, now unfortunately reasonableness has a little bit of a curve, right? What does someone consider reasonable? That actually changes based on where you live, all right? And what is reasonable changes based on where you live. So for example, what is reasonable pay in the Boot Hill is going to be different than reasonable pay in New York City, all right? So they are going to be different, but that's why it's considered reasonable, all right? So you have to kind of go with that. And it has to be incurred in the business. Yes,
So when you talk about ordinance, it says customary for others in a similar business.
business.
Okay, so as long as it's normal in your line of.
Your line of business. So your line of business is whacked out. You got to try to find something else that's in your line of business. So like, for example, if your line of business is an outdoor activity, you're going to have different things that are occurring in your line of business than if you run a boutique. All right, so it's going to be your line of business.
So like when we're talking about the dentist's office and he incurred those fines.
Right.
For
That
medical
is,
waste.
well, no, you should not be incurring fines for disposing of medical waste improperly.
But the expense
But-
to dispose of medical waste is going to be normal for a dentist.
The expense of disposing medical waste properly is
Not the
going to be
fine.
normally, but not the fines.
Not the fine,
No.
but just the
No.
expense to do it.
But like, let's say you're in a, I can't think of what they did, but Doe Run, whatever, does anybody remember what Doe Run is? Dang it. But Doe Run is a plant down,
The lead? or-
yes, yeah, and it's a smelting, right?
Yeah,
But,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
smelting facility down south of us somewhere. Okay, whatever they did or do, they've been around for a while, but they got in a lot of trouble for doing things wrong. Okay, but the type of business they were in was smelting. I don't even know what that is. Okay, but it's not a real great business. And if you think of like coal mines, let's do something more broad. Coal mines. There's some legal issues you can get into from the fact that we hear coal mines collapse, people get sick, right? So having a legal team that has legal costs is going to be normal and ordinary for a coal mine industry, right? If you run a boutique, having a lawyer on retainer is probably not ordinary for a boutique. All right? So those type of things are what is ordinary and necessary. Section 212 allows for ordinary and necessary paid or incurred in the following in the production of income. All right? And again, management, maintenance of property held for the production. So 212 is when you're producing income. 162 is for businesses that don't produce income. So expenses in connection with termination, collection of refund of tax. So just Slightly different. All right, 212 expenses are those deductions for AGI. This could be rent and royalty income. All right, why? We're producing income, all right, by doing rent or royalty in connection with sole proprietorships. And we're going to go through all other expenses with 212 that have nothing to do with renting are going to be itemized deductions. And we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to jump to that part now, okay? So we're going to stop here. I'm going to escape out of this and go quickly because it takes too long to speed up. We're going to jump down to we're going to do rental, then we're going to do hobby, and then we'll go back to the beginning. All right, so it kind of just tells you where, from my standpoint, where it's not that it's, but yeah, and it's on 42. If you're following the slides, it's on 42. Okay, so rental vacation homes, one of the problems with these is determining, is it a vacation home or is it a rental home? I'm going to pick on Marcus. Most of you guys have had it. Because he has a condo at the lake. Okay? Someday I'm going to have a condo at the lake, but I still have kids in school and he doesn't. So, but he does not rent it. But there's people that have condos at the lake that rent their condos. So how do you determine? Well, Marcus could not go on his tax return and deduct costs with or associated with his condo because he doesn't rent it. And as long as he doesn't rent it for more than 14 days, he doesn't have to. So there are ways, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard this or how many of you guys follow golf, but you good?
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
For those people that follow golf, like with the Masters, all right, the Masters and the Memorial, U.S. Open, those big golf tournaments have a huge following. They last 1 week. So what people have done, and actually one of the book companies, and I think it was McGraw-Hill, when the Masters went, and it's always down in North Carolina, Georgia, when it was down there, she had just moved in to her house. And someone said, don't unpack your box. You got to unpack them fast and then put the boxes away. And she says, what are you talking about? She goes, they said, the Masters is coming. It was Augusta, Georgia. You need to unpack quickly and rent your house out. And she goes, what are you talking about? She goes, they cannot get enough places for people to stay. So she hadn't been in her house 3 weeks, and she rented it out. And now think about the people that usually attend golf. All right? Different crowd than maybe some of the other sports where you could rent, like when the 2006 or 9 All-Star game came to St. Louis, people rented out their houses, and that didn't turn out well for some people. But she did. She rented it out, and I can't remember what she made. It was ridiculous what she made for I think it was Tuesday to Sunday. But it was not a rental. Anything less than 14 days and you do not rent, that is not considered a rental. If it's less than 14 days out of the whole year.
So as long as you rent 14 days.
Or less, your house is now rental. Now, did she have to include the income?
Yeah.
Yes. Did she rent her house? No. Now, do people include their income when they do that? Probably not, okay? Did she? I told her to, okay? Can't tell you if she listened to me. I see her 1 or 2 times a year, but I did tell her that's considered income. But she did not have to include her house as rental, okay? But, so
she had to include that in whole income.
as income,
But she wasn't allowed to make any kind of.
well, you don't
deductions or
necessarily want
expenses.
to. Depending on what it is, you don't necessarily want to, because that also takes away from your other items. But it was considered income. Anytime you have money coming in the door, it's income.
Well, with the stereotype.
Now, did she? Probably not. I don't know if she did. I didn't ask her. I don't want to know. And once you do have your license, you learn you don't ask people questions you don't want to know the answers to. I mean, it's kind of like a lawyer. Lawyers don't ask questions they don't want to know the answers to either.
So she doesn't get vacation home. Well, I don't know.
Right. Okay, so when we go through, you can have both, personal and vacation home. A lot of people that have places down at the beaches do that, okay? All right, deduction of those expenses might be limited to the rental income, all right, especially if it's primarily for purposes. And determination depends on how you use it. Rental days, no gross income is recognized and no deduction. So they're telling you no gross income is recognized. But does that go against our direct?
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
And then if you see more than 14 days, treatment depends on the amount of personal use.
So if you rent your house more than 14 days, are you saying that you can do things like, so because the itemized,
I'm actually going to have to look at that now that I just reread that, because that is not what we told her to do, and I know she didn't include it anyways,
Is
because
that 15 days per year or?
per year. It's on a calendar basis. No gross income
it sounds like they're
recognized.
hinting that it's gonna cost you more to maintain the house than anything you would have made in less than 14 days.
That's, I think, what they're saying. But I can tell you that even if she would have included it, the amount of effort to include any expenses she would have had wouldn't have been worth her claiming as a rental either, though. So,
So this is.
I will look at that. I will look at that. Because that doesn't go with any of the gross income comments we had, and that was not my understanding. But I will look at that, because I've only talked about this every semester for what feels like my life. But I will definitely take a look at that.
So this is an above the line deduction.
Oh, yeah. We're all above.
So now that the deductible, standard deduction has changed so much,
This does not affect this.
but if you rent your house at more than 14 days, and now you can start above the line deductions for taxes and things like that, that you necessarily wouldn't benefit you anymore to itemize.
Still doesn't affect this because you have to rent for more than 15 days.
So you take a 2-week vacation and rent out your house and then vacation.
I think the people that don't rent out their house don't want to rent their house out. They're not going to rent it out for tax purposes if they already aren't renting it. Marcus will not start renting his condo for this purpose. I can guarantee you. People that don't rent are not going to rent because now they don't itemize. That's not going to be the changing factor. So, I will take a look at that because that just switches some thoughts because that does, I'm going to have to go beyond, that's not a textbook thing, so let me figure out, let me look into that a little bit more. But my thought would be exactly what Katie just said is the amount. Under normal circumstances, the rent that you're going to get for that home under 14 days will be exceeded by the amount of expenses that you're probably going to have to deduct for it. Masters excluded, probably. They're losing tax money on the masters. So more than 14 days, let's move on. Treatment depends on how much personal time you have it for out of the regular year. So if rented for 15 days or more and personal days use not more than greater than 14 days or 10% of fair, then it's primarily rental use. So you got to look and you got to say yes.
I was just gonna say, do you think that they said less than 15 days because the 14th day actually counts? Like, does that make sense? Like, do you think that that's why they say on the last slide?
Right?
Do you think that that's why they said less than 15 days because you can actually use the 14th day as part of your 14 days?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's I would. That's not the part I was stuck on. I was stuck on the gross income part. That's the part I was stuck on. If rented for 15 days or more, and personal use days are not more than greater or 14 days. So basically, if you're not using it very much and it's rent for personal days, and you're renting it for more than 15, then it's considered rental, right? You can deduct all of the expenses, even if it amounts into a loss, right? So the key there is we're flipping it the other way around, all right? So if you want to deduct it for renting purposes, then you got to use it for less than 14 days or 10% of the rented days.
How do they describe fair rental days?
Fair rental days. So you're going to look at, when they look at, I'm going to show you a couple examples where they're going to take the 10% and figure out how many days you've rented based on that. All right, so I was going to say person. Personal or rental use, if rented for 15 days or more, and personal use days exceed 14 days or 10%, then you're going to treat it like a hobby. All right, which we didn't talk about hobbies yet, but hobbies basically say you're not in it to make a profit. A hobby is not in it to make a profit. You're doing it, and the example they use when we go to hobbies is raising horses.
It's really expensive.
Yes, but that's why there's usually it's a hobby. People that raise horses, not for racing them, okay? It's a hobby. It's because you like to, okay? And you're not in it. If you happen to make some money because you sell one, that's a hobby. You do it because you like to do it. So they're saying if you're renting it more than the personal use days is exceeded the 14 days, then you treat it like a hobby. Rented expenses deducted in a 3-step process. And that 3-step process I will show you. So for personal use, if the rented days were 200 days, if you rented it for 200 days, then 10% is 20. So if it's 7 days of personal use, it's not significant. If it's 18 days of personal use, it's not significant. 25 days, it's significant. So you're kind of looking at it overall, how much time did you use there, based on the number of days you rented it. All right. Now, if we only rented it for 100 days, 10 days is going to be the, quote, 10%, but you always get to drop back to that 14 days. All right. So it's going to be 14 days or the 10%. That's where you come up with that, what's considered normal. So if you rent it for 300 days, then it's going to be 30 is what you can go up to. All right, so then you're up to 330 days. So the more you rent it, the more time you can actually stay in it. So I know people that have places down in Florida. They can go and stay a month in it and rent it 330 days. The thing is, most of the time a place in Florida is not rented 330 days. So a lot of times you can go and spend December and maybe even all of January. And you're not going to be able, you're not going to have to worry. You're going to probably get to exclude most of your, you're going to have to do it as this because people don't want it. Now, it doesn't mean you stay in it. You might only go for 45 days, but most of the time those winter months aren't necessarily taken. All right, so how do you allocate those expenses between personal and rental? Well, of course, it can't be too easy. All right. So when you look at real estate and mortgage interest, those are the two big ones because as Katie's mentioned earlier, those two can go as itemized deductions. Right now, those two won't go for a lot of people anymore as itemized deductions as they go to the standard deduction, but how they're allocated to rental is still going to be the same as of now. So there's two different ways. One is the IRS way and one is the court's way. All right? The IRS wants you to allocate based on total days, meaning you're going to love this. 300 number of days used. So if they only used it for 270, then you're using it based on 270. The court states does it based on the number of days in a year, 365. All right, so it's based on the number of days used or the number of days in a year.
When you say used, are you saying?
Number of days rented. Yeah,
Oh,
rented.
Are you going to show an example of them doing
We
that?
will. Yeah. Yeah. All other expenses are based on total number of days used. So basically, if you're doing the IRS method, everybody's done the same. If you're doing the courts method, interest and taxes are done based on 365 days, and the rest of the expenses are based on the days used.
So the IRS versus the courts, you mean the IRS will audit you?
No, meaning that you'll have to do it for tax purposes using the IRS method. Using the total days used. That's the way the IRS wants you to do it.
And so what's the deal with the courts then? Like
That's just another method of preparing the taxes. There's always different ways of doing it. The court's method is another way of doing it.
So both are perfectly acceptable. The IRS takes it and won't complain.
Yeah, different companies will do it different ways. Just like you have straight line depreciation, you have units of production, you have double declining, you have two different ways in which you can do it. But you stick with one. You got to stick with one.
Are there any differences depending on the state that the rent was in?
I actually, because when it comes to states, I can't answer that question. So there could be some states that require you to do it a certain way, and if that's the case, you're going to do it that way for federal. Don't know that answer. That's a great question. Okay. All right, so the treatment of the income and expenses of a primarily vacation home, rental income goes in gross income. The expenses are deductible for AGI, and the rental income and expenses go on a Schedule E. Schedule E is already on Blackboard. It was one of the items that I put there at the beginning of the semester. This is the 2017 Schedule E. As of right now, there is no 2018 Schedule E. My guess is there will be one. All right? Right? There's got to be at some point. So I'm going to blow it up, and, well, not that big. And then I'll just move it down. So when you're looking at a Schedule E, the top just talks about what is the property. Then it has a list of property types. So it's going to ask you if it's a single dwelling, multifamily, and then it's a apartment type complex. Okay. Fair rental days, personal use days, and then it comes down. You can actually list, and if you look here, here's your dates: single family, multi-use, short family, short vacation, commercial, land, and royalties. So those are the different types. And then you put those up here under ABC, so you can actually do 3 different rentals on the same form. If you have more than that, you do more than one form.
What's a self-rental?
Huh?
What's a self-rental?
I believe those are the, I'm not positive, but I believe what those are is if you have units that you then rent out again. So like here, when it talks about places, you have a place that you're renting.
So like you have a duplex and you live in one half and the other half is rented out?
No, that's not what I was thinking of. Because I'm not positive what they are, but I believe a self-rental is,
Like an Airbnb type.
that's what I was thinking, yeah, so like,
So like you have a room that you rent out?
yes, like more like a room or just like a here it's my house, but then I'm back type thing, I think. Airbnb's added a whole new thing to that,
Yeah,
right.
I was wondering where they would fit.
I think, I'm not sure if an Airbnb, it could easily be a self-rental and other, or it could be a single-family resident. I don't know where if that's going to turn your house into a rental property.
Or part of your house.
Or part of your house, yeah, because if it's a room, I really think a room could be either a 7 or an 8. Because think about all the people, when I say all you people, I'm talking about big cities for the most part, that rent a room. I mean, that's just how, you respond to an ad. Where are you staying? I'm renting a room. And it doesn't have to be a big city. My brother has a friend that lives in Springfield he's renting a room from somebody in Springfield. I'm like, Springfield, Missouri? When he told me that. And he's just like, yeah. I'm like, and he's not, he's older. He's older than I am. So it's not like this is a college kid renting a room. He's an adult. Not that college kids aren't adults. I just mean he's a grown adult renting a room. And I'm like,
My cousin did it.
yeah, but not in Springfield, Missouri, was he? I was just surprised. Springfield's
here in
not
St.
big
Louis.
to me, Yes, St. Louis is big. Okay,
So when you have like a duplex.
yeah, that's rental. That's going to be that's going to be this, number 2.
So when you live in half and rent out half, then
Yeah.
you just split everything down the middle then, and half of it goes to rental expense and half of it
It goes to you, yes.
Okay.
And then when you have an apartment building, that's going to be commercial. That's going to be a 4. That's going to be a 4. Because you're usually not living in it. If you are, that's going to fall under some other, like usually that's going to be, if you're not paying rent, that's going to be like a salary almost, like a part of your,
Because you'd be like the manager.
you're the man, yeah, that's part of your pay usually. Okay, so you got your rent and received. Royalties is going to be something you're paid, okay? Rent, like from having it. Rent is the money coming in the door. So rent and royalties are different. Then you just have all your different expenses. Those are pretty self-explanatory, but how we get them are different.
I don't understand.
Okay, royalties are fees received based on item. Now this form, let me pull this back up. A Schedule E can be used for 2 different things. And right now we're talking about rent. We'll come back to royalties on a whole nother chapter. Okay.
Isn't that like intellectual property?
It's intellectual, oil, could be also based on oil, or anything that's an intangible.
Okay, I get it, it's not related.
It's not related to this. That's why I kind of went royalties, and I kind of went whoop and scooped past it. So this is what most of these, with the exception of mortgage and taxes, are going to be done using the courts. Going to be based on the actual days. You're going to take those expenses, and if you had the place for 270 days that was rented, then 270 days you're going to allocate those fees between the number of days you stayed in it and the number of days it was rented out to her. And that's
The courts use the 365.
no, the court stays the number of days used. The IRS used to the number. You're right. Sorry, but the IRS is what you're going to use for all these. It's only the taxes and fees that use the 365. Okay. So those will be the numbers and they get all added up, and in the end you're just subtracting. It's just how do you come up with those exact numbers is what you're trying to come up with.
Utilities are going to differ depending on the time of year. in
Yep,
places.
but that's what you got to keep track of. I mean, you got to track them. Just like you do if you're doing a home office, for example. We talked about that at the beginning of class. Home office, you got to keep track of it. The easiest people do a home office are budget billing. They're the easiest people to do a home office for because their bills are exactly the same year round. You don't got to keep track of it. But for people who don't do a home office, well, that's the utility bill. But, you know, telephone bills and that stuff, you got to keep track of those bills. And so for if you have rental property, you got to keep track of your bills. All of them, to be safe.
Can you use the IRS method on a month-to-month basis? So like, you were talking about Florida,
Right.
right? And most of the time they're gonna rent in the summer, well, you're gonna have a high electric bill due to the air conditioner running so much.
Right.
So can you say, well, I rented them out
If you
every
wanted
single
to-
day in the summer,
Right.
all of this utility is going here, but in the winter it wasn't rented out, so that utility goes to me.
I think that if you found out that if you added them all together,
It sort of levels out.
it's going to be the same. Yeah. You could go to that detail if you wanted, but I bet you money if you did them all together, it's going to be almost identical.
Then your gas bill will be.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. It's going to even out.
Well, but yeah, but nobody's renting it. In
But
the
you
summer
could.
either.
The answer is yes, you can. If you want to go to the work and do one by one, you can do it.
Well, I'm a penny pincher, so I probably
No,
do.
you could definitely do it. The IRS is not going to stop you. Like, the IRS doesn't stop my dad from doing all the work that I do before I do it in much more detail than it ever needs to be done. But he does it, and then he gives it to me, and every year I tell him, you don't need to do that. And he does it. So,
Whatever makes the man happy.
exactly. All right, so we did that. I just wanted to go back and make sure. All right, treatment of allocated personal portion. Again, primary rental use, taxes are deductible from AGI. So this is our mortgage, interest, and then personal rental. Primary rental uses, okay. And then personal rental use, mortgage intro is deductible from AGI, and personal portion of expenses is not deductible. All right, so we got to remember that, right? We get to deduct for our purpose that we stay there, the mortgage still, and interest. But all those other wonderful things that fall under the 270 days that's not rented, advertising, insurance, any other of those expenses, that utilities, those don't get to be deducted under personal.
And that's for when you stay more than 10% or 14 days?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So back on Schedule A, if you rent it out for 100 days, then 100 days of those expenses get to be deducted. The other 265 days just get to be eaten.
So if you just spend 2 weeks in your own vacation home, you lose all of those.
But you still only get to deduct what's rented. Unless you stay under 2 weeks, right? Then it's just rented all the time.
Some people, they have
Right.
Places that they usually rent out. that they're-
Right. Yeah, so you got to think about that. If you're close to keeping it on, just going over the number of days rented, go stay somewhere else. Don't stay in your own place.
What if you're trying to get it rented? And it's,
To stay under the 14 days, and it's a rental property. If you stay in it, it becomes
so.
where you have to allocate. If you don't stay in it and it's not rented, it's a rental property. That's not rented. It's kind of like a rental house. If you have a fully rental property, and I don't have anyone that has a rental home that they also stay in, okay? I have a couple people that I help with that have rental property, that they rent out. If no one lives in it for 3 or 4 months, it's just not rented and they lose money, okay? Same thing with the rental vacation home. If no one's in it renting it, okay, so not to make light of it, but Puerto Rico, okay? Puerto Rico is bad right now. And one of my favorite places I wanted to go see was on my list that is not going to be a great place to visit for a while, right? So if your home survived in Puerto Rico, you're not going to get many people that are going to go stay there, okay? Not very at all. So your rental income just went gone, okay? So you're not getting anything in the door. Therefore, you're not getting any rental. It doesn't mean it's not a rental home anymore. It just means it's a very non-productive rental home. You can still deduct it. You're just going to be showing losses.
Now, what if I'm down in my rental home in Florida doing work on it, you know?
Working on the rental home.
Working on the rental.
But you're not
home.
staying in it.
I can't stay there.
Less than 14 days.
Even if I'm working on it.
If you're rehabbing it,
Rehab, yes.
there are some exclusions for rehabbing. But that's because it's non-inhabitable. You got to make sure there's a difference. You can't be rehabbing it while you're staying in a very nice, luxurious master bedroom
Okay.
on the beach.
2 questions. What about Puerto Rico? So even though you're not earning that income, couldn't you donate the use of that space, say the doctor?
Then it's a written. Then it's a write-off.
And it's a charitable deduction.
Yes, it's a write-off.
worth the amount that you would have made from the rental?
Not one for one, no, but it could be a write-off.
Okay, and then the other question was, what about if you let somebody else stay? So let's say, you know, your kid got married, so you let them have their honeymoon at your place. So you're not staying there, but you're not really earning money because you're not going to charge your kid. But
I
you're
believe,
not staying there.
I believe family members are gonna be considered you. So that will count as days in which you are staying there.
What about friends?
But will this go into one of those things where it's like,
How are they gonna know?
Don't say, don't know type of thing?
Yeah.
Like,
Probably, exactly, probably. But
they can't track your.
I can't give you a direct answer on friends that you just let stay there, but I agree completely. That's gonna be, how are they gonna know on that one, and does that probably happen? Yes.
And if it's an undesirable time, they're really not
Oh,
going to know. 'Cause
right.
nobody's
And
charging
does it happen? Yeah, condos go on rented all the time. They actually recommend that if you can go, and my brother and I talked about this last time we went to Gulf Shores, we booked it like 5 months ahead of time. That we just need to say, you know what, we're going down there the second week of June, and we're going to make a reservation 3 weeks ahead of time. And we're just going to get a place that somebody else canceled on. We're not going to be picky. We're not going to say it has to be here and it has to be this and it has to be. We're just going to go down there and we're going to be Destin or Gulf Shores and we're going to find a place and that's where we're going to go. And we're going to spend a heck of a lot less than we spent doing. We're just going to say we know we're going the second week, and that's what we're going to do. And I think we would spend a whole lot less because there are a lot of the places that cancel and do such and such, and they have these places that need to. Yeah. Okay, a couple things before we go back to hobby losses. Number one, you cannot deduct for the payment of somebody else's obligation. So for example, taxes. You pay someone else's taxes, you cannot deduct that, and people do. You pay your mom and dad's taxes because they don't have the money to pay their own taxes. That is not a deduction for you. The only way you get to deduct the payment of a taxes or the payment of something is if you are obligated to pay it. So therefore, if for some reason you are obligated to pay your parents' taxes, then yes, you can, all right? Or if you pay the medical expenses of a dependent, which could include your parents, then you can deduct that. So you can deduct your kids' medical expenses and your parents' medical expenses if they're your dependent.
What about your kids' taxes? So like you.
If you're responsible for your kids' taxes, but there's very few reasons you're going to be responsible for your child's taxes.
Even if they're like 16, it's their first job.
You're not responsible for their taxes. All right? They're responsible. If they don't pay their taxes, their Social Security number is responsible for that taxes, not you. So, no deduction is allowed. And there are people that pay taxes. I had a friend who paid the taxes for their brother and brother-in-law, because he didn't have the ability, and he never did. And if they didn't pay the taxes, they were going to lose their mom's land. They paid it every year. And they insisted that they got the deduction for those taxes. They didn't. They made the payment, but it wasn't their property, and it wasn't their responsibility. But they made it. They can't. The best bet would have been for them to give the money to the brother, and the brother to pay the taxes. The brother hasn't even filed a tax return, but there's ways to do around that. Personal expenditures are not deductible, okay, just in general. And that's kind of what we just showed on the house. When you stay in a rental property, you don't get to deduct the personal side of the rental property. All right, so now we're going to jump back to hobby. I know we're kind of jumping around, and just like the last couple weeks, I have a feeling we're not going to get everything covered again tonight. So I'd rather make sure we talk about the one things I want to talk about. Yeah, we're going to blame Katie.